Thank you so much for having me here today. It's good to spend some time with you. And I've been in printing per se for almost 20 years. I started out in publishing as a customer of printers. And so kind of where you are, or you will be soon, hopefully. And I got the idea to start a digital printing company when I worked for a magazine in Charlotte. Wrote a business plan for 2 or 3 years, ended up striking a deal with a partner, and the rest is history. But I'm here today to talk and to help y'all learn a little bit more about how to work with printers, okay? And we'll talk about a few of the ideas that I've got that might help you along, speed you along that path. A lot of people in the industry think, and outside the industry especially, think that printing is dead and printing's going nowhere. But that's not the case whatsoever. There are certain types of printing that are pretty much dead. I don't know, when's the last time you used the Yellow Pages? Here are the Yellow Pages in form of Google or Yahoo or whatever. So printing of Yellow Pages, yeah, it's out of here. But there's a lot of other types of printing that are still very much alive and well and thriving and growing. So it's important that that you have at least some general working knowledge of how printing in general works. What I would recommend is challenge yourself to learn more about printing and the various processes and how they work. The digital printing, offset printing with liquid ink, kind of the old-fashioned way. Grand or wide format, large format printing, where you're printing big signs on rigid material or posters or banners and things like that. Completely different types of processes than the small format process. Screen printing. A lot of things are still screen printed. I don't know if you've ever heard of letterpress printing, but that is really old-timey printing that's kind of back in vogue the way vinyl is, That's another thing that to a lot of people is a curiosity, but still is becoming more popular again. Learning all those different types of printing is good, but as designers, it's important that you learn the pros and the cons and the applications of them, like you were just talking about. Because when your client comes to you and says, I want you to design, I don't know, it could be something as simple as a business card. Okay, and if they have a client, or a company rather, and employees in that company that might number in the hundreds, and they need business cards for everyone, they might want to print them on an offset press. And so you need to understand what are the pros and the cons as far as designs go for printing on an offset press. They might have 2 employees, and it would be crazy to pay as much as you would pay for offset printed business cards. So you might print them digitally, and that would mean that you need to have some working knowledge of what type of designs work well digitally. Like for instance, on a digital press, designs that typically have big areas of nothing but solid color with nothing going on in it, not even any noise in it, don't tend to work real well because they tend to band some on a digital press where it may not on an offset press. So just knowing things like that helps. This business card I just happen to have, this isn't printed. This side of the paper is black. If you can see, it's sort of 2 pieces of paper put together. But if we were printing an area like this on a sheet of paper, simply approaching it, consider this sort of the cylinder of the press, okay, that gets inked, and then the ink transfers to the whatever it's being printed on, okay? Digital presses typically have kind of small cylinders, okay? Large presses might have, depending on the size of the press, real big cylinders. But what happens is, every time around, ink gets transferred to this blanket that's on the cylinder, which is just a carrying mechanism for ink, and then it gets transferred onto what it's printed on. Well, a smaller cylinder has to get re-inked at times when you might not be finished printing this big area of color. So think of it as when re-inking, this cylinder or this blanket on it has to kind of breathe for just a minute before it can take on any more ink, and where it's breathing, it's not absorbing as much ink as in the other places, and so when it lays down ink, it's not absorbing as much, so that's a lighter spot in your printing, if that makes sense. Okay, not to get real technical about it, but that's what you're talking about with banding. When you look at it, it may be faint, it may be really obvious, but this black all the way across is not totally solid, uniformly black all the way across. And so you need to know that. You know, the best press to print large areas of solid, maybe not quite this, you know, small, but larger areas, is a really big press, because it's got big rollers that you can put a lot of ink on, and all that ink goes to whatever you're printing on, and it transfers nice and clearly and uniformly and good saturation, and it looks like this. Okay? Knowing that is a good thing. Now, you're not going to learn that stuff overnight, and you're probably going to need to work at it to some degree and have some experience with printing to some degree in order to pick up those little tricks of the trade. Okay? Talking about some of these various types of printing, let's say digital versus offset. Digital is, think of, you've probably got a big output device here somewhere in this building that looks like a copier, or you know, a color copier, black and white copier, whatever. Consider that your output device, and it's probably a digital device, so let's call that a digital printer, where you on your screen have an electronic file, you click print, and it comes out on the other end. There's no plates, there's no real concerns about registration. If it's different colors, with all the colors laying down exactly on each other so that it doesn't look blurred or anything like that, it just all happens. That's digital printing, okay? Offset printing, you've got to make a plate, and then you've got to take that plate, more than likely, and mount it on a press, and then ink up that press, run the press till you get the ink modulated and all smoothed out and up to color and all that, and then get going. So there's a lot of time and materials that are involved in setting up a press run on an offset press. So small runs, or as we call short runs, are not really something you want to deal with on an offset press unless you've got a lot of money and you're just willing to invest it and spend it that way. You know, most people are just going to go with a digital type printer. Wide format, you probably have a wide format printer here. I don't know if you've got one of these wide Epsons maybe, or Hewlett Packards. There are a number of things, but it will typically take roll-fed media that will go through it, and you can print posters in there. That's one of the wide format, a really popular wide format device. We have one of those as well. It'll print something 60 inches wide by as long as the roll going through it. And it's great printers. 8-color, high fidelity, looks really pretty. A growing, becoming more popular end of wide format printing now is something called a UV or ultraviolet flatbed press. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it has a bed, just like this table. We've got one as well, that we can put anything and print anything on it that is up to 8 feet long and 4 feet wide. And if you've ever played air hockey, you know, at the arcade or whatever, you know how it has those little air holes that come up, you know, in the bed of it to keep your puck or whatever floating? This has one of those, a bed with all those little holes in it, so that if you're putting some heavy material on it and you want to get it positioned just right and anchored into the corner that everything else is working from, the air can blow out, so you can move it around, but then you can flip a switch and it sucks it down and holds it, and that's when the air sucks it down. And it's got a head that prints special ultraviolet inks that it has before and after it. It's got ultraviolet lamps, and it just goes back and forth on anything that's no more than 2 inches thick, 8 feet by 4 feet, and it will print it. Just keep going and print it. And that is what I would call, using just loose vernacular, digital screen printing, basically. It's you can rub your hands on it. You ever rub your hands on screen printing? Like on a t-shirt, a new t-shirt, or a sign, a yard sign, or something like that that's been screen printed. You can feel the ink that's been cured on it. Same way with this sort of procedure. But that's an ultraviolet flatbed, and that is a really growing form of wide format printing. And then you've got flexo printing for packaging. I don't know if y'all deal in any kind of packaging, but that's a certain type of press, and frankly, I don't know a whole lot about it. We don't do a lot of packaging. I might do a few prototypical jobs for packaging, but a flexo press is what you typically print packaging with, whether it's pasteboard boxes or it could be in those end pieces like you go at Lowe's, or those things that stick out in the aisle that sort of wiggle around at the grocery store. If you print a lot of them, that's typically how they're going to be printed, with that type of press. And then you've got a screen printing press where you literally force inks through a screen and then have them cure. That's what makes that type of printing so durable. Those are just some of the forms of printing, you know, that are pretty popular now. The best way to learn printing, though, or really anything, but printing in particular, since that's what we're talking about today, is hands-on. Okay, and by that I would say just go to work for a printing company or get an internship with a printing company. We have kind of a standing internship program, since we're real close to Greensboro, with this department at UNCG, and we rotate the folks that come out of there looking for internships through our program, and we have hired 3 of them. And 2 of them have moved on, one to Florida and another one works now here in Raleigh, but we still use them on a freelance basis because they do freelance work, and then one of them still works for us. But it's really good to do that, and I would encourage you, if you're going to do that, to seek out an internship at a local printing company that isn't just one niche of printing. Like, say, a big printing company that has nothing but big printing presses, and you will be a tiny little cog in the wheel that you'll just be doing one thing over and over and over again. You know, in that scenario, you're going to learn something really well, but you're not going to learn a lot of things, and you're probably not going to learn a lot about printing in general. I would recommend probably working at a smaller printing company where you can get involved and do a lot of things. You know, our kids who came in from UNCG, they kind of have a background like I think y'all might, which is more design, okay? But I'll tell you, working at a printing company, I'm going to use an analogy. I don't know how much you know about home building, but when you're building homes, you've kind of got 2 types of carpenters involved. First guys are the framing crew, that they'll come in and they'll frame up a house, and you know, it's just the 2x4s and the skeleton of it, and then they'll go to the next one, and then to the next one, and to the next one. That's the framing crew. But then a finished carpenter, the cabinet maker, is the other type of carpenters there. You guys are kind of like the finished carpenters, the designers. You know, y'all are into artistic things that people are going to look at, and not what's behind the sheetrock and what's holding it up, okay? So we're bringing somebody in who typically looks at things graphically as overall what they look like. But at a printing company in our department, we need framers. We need people who are going to take the files from you guys, quickly process it and pre-flight it, like check it to make sure all the cut marks are on it, check it to make sure that if it bleeds, the bleeds are pulled out of the cut marks. You know what we're talking about with bleeds? Yeah? Okay. That they're pulled out, checking to make sure that if it's a piece that's going to print 2 or 3 spot color, that it's set up that way. And that we didn't get a PDF file that was 4-color process. Because if we get that, we can't use it. It's been separated out to cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. It has to be those 3 spot colors, okay? And that's probably the biggest issue with files that we receive, is that somebody makes a PDF, and I don't know what it is, but there's some little button in there, she could tell you, that you got to hit to make it output as a spot color file, okay? Or they left the cut marks off, or they left the bleeds out of it. But anyway, checking for all of that stuff, and then electronically sending it down the line, and then looking at the next one. It's like framing that house. You get framed it up, and you go to the next lot in the neighborhood and start framing on top of that foundation. It's working there is going to give you framing skills. It's going to give you pre-flighting skills. And you may go, oh gosh, that's boring, I don't want to do that, or whatever. But what it's going to do for you is it's going to make you a pro at setting up files for print, or probably a lot of other things that don't need a lot of work done to them. So in other words, who you're working for, you're going to really shine, because you're going to come in from day one after you've gotten some experience of that. If you're freelancing for yourself or whatever, you're going to know how to set files up. It's not going to be a bunch of theory that you're going to walk out of any university in the United States with. It's going to be hands-on. So that kind of experience that you're going to learn working in a pre-press department and a graphics department is good. But after we get them kind of used to that and they know what to look for, then we're going to have them start setting things up that we do in-house for people, like setting up the real easy stuff, business cards, or some brochures, or a poster, that kind of thing. And we'll have our more experienced graphics people looking over their shoulder. So again, you're kind of learning in a laboratory environment, but you're still learning and still doing, which is the best way to do it. After they get kind of comfortable with that, then we're going to start having them run some of our machines, having them run our digital presses, literally. Send the file over to it and then run the job on it, or run jobs on our 8-color Epson printer, okay? And running jobs on our flatbed. So there's going to be a lot of other stuff going on at a smaller company where you become more of a generalist because they're going to ask you to do more things that way. Also, you're going to learn other things by osmosis. In terms of considering your designs, is begin with the end in mind, which is, okay, before I design something, I've got to think about how it's going to print. I've got to think about how it might finish and fold and all that kind of stuff. So even though you may not be doing finishing work in a printing company, in a smaller printing company, you will be around that end of the business a whole lot more than you would be if you were sequestered in a cubicle on the 3rd floor of a giant printing company. So, and I'm not saying at all that there's anything wrong with giant printing companies. If you want broad exposure so you can really soak up this knowledge about something, then go to a place where you can soak it up as a generalist. You're going to not only learn things in the graphics department, but you'll probably get involved pretty quickly, maybe in some production things. So you will see how things are going to be printed and finished once you're done with them. If you're printing, you can print on a lot of things. The most common thing we're going to print on is paper. Now, there's a lot of other substrates. Y'all talk about substrates? It's a word that I never knew before I got into printing. Substrates are whatever it is you're printing on, okay? Today I've talked in our business about 3 substrates just this morning. Paper, window cling material, like the kind of thing you put up on your windshield, where it says when the mileage you got to get your oil changed, you pull the thing off, whatever. Window cling material, or vinyl film, which is also kind of like a window cling, but it's got adhesive on it. So all of those are substrates. But the most popular substrate in most printing companies is going to be paper. So if you're going to learn about printing, you got to learn about paper. It might even be a good idea, I don't know if you've still got enough time in this particular class to do it, but to maybe even get a rep from one of the paper companies in and just talk to y'all for an hour or so about paper. There's all kinds of options on paper, but most of those reps who the paper merchants or the paper companies are kind of the middlemen between the mills and the buyers, like y'all, when you might be speccing paper, as graphic designers, or us buying paper because we've been told it needs to print on a certain type of paper, is the paper merchants. We have a new employee, a customer service person in our company. She's been there for about, 2-3 months. And a week ago, we got one of our paper reps to come in and give her about an hour-long, what we call paper school, where he just covered the basics of paper. The differences between cover stock and text weight stock, coated stock versus uncoated stock. Some people think, well, if it's a coated stock, it's glossy. No, there's lots of different finishes on coated stock. Gloss, matte, dull, satin, and then uncoated stocks can have all kinds of finishes as well. Laid finish, which has a little design put in it, or a linen, or a smooth, or a vellum. There's all kinds of things. But get to know a paper person, okay? And they're in the business. They can get as detailed as you need them to be. They can be as simple as you need them to be. But just if you're a designer, have them come by, or they come by. Usually, if you work in a design firm or an ad agency or something like that, chances are they're going to pay regular calls on y'all. Okay, and just pull them aside and say, hey, if you could one day spare 30 minutes and just teach me the basics of paper, that'd be a great thing. Okay, it won't cost you anything, but there's still good things that you need to know as designers about how ink, both digital and offset ink, behaves on paper. Probably 10 years back, they do less of it now because there's been a lot of consolidation in the paper business. There are fewer mills, and so they don't put as much money into these sample books. But back 10 years ago, it was not uncommon at all for someone like Carla, who was one of my customers, to have a sample book from one of the paper merchants for the same type of paper that I get, that was much more ornate and full of real cool designs and everything, because she was the designer. The paper companies are smart. They want to put a book in front of y'all that has all this cool design stuff printed in it already. Whereas the paper book that I've got for that same paper, same exact paper, is nothing but a bunch of unprinted swatches. You know, but that's fine. I don't need anything else. I mean, I need to know, you know, how many weights it comes in, how many colors it comes in, and what the availability of it is. That's all I'm interested in, is the guy who's ordering it to use it. Okay? Because chances are somebody told me to order this particular type of stock. But learning about papers, learning about you know, other substrates, especially ones if you're working at a place that designs for or actually prints, if you're working at a printer, on wide format materials, it's important to learn about them and how ink behaves on them. For instance, uncoated papers, inks tend to soften, look softer because they sink in and they blot more and they soak into it. So the same exact color of ink on an uncoated stock is going to look pretty different than it would on a piece of coated paper, where for the most part the ink sits up on top of it. It dries, but it sits up on top, so it has a lot more bounce to it. Most printers will have house stocks. I mean, we've got them that we order on a regular basis. We order a lot of it, so we get pretty aggressive pricing from the paper merchants. So somebody might have spec'd a certain type of just smooth stock that's uncoated and bright white for their job that might be kind of a boutique brand, whereas this house stock, unless you put it side by side and had a really discerning eye, you couldn't tell the difference. Okay, but except when it came time to pay the bill, and that's another thing. As designers, I encourage you to always remember that you're kind of spending other people's money. You're spending your client's money. And if you really want to be seen in a positive way by your clients, look for the best deal for them. You know, when one type of paper looks so similar, but it just doesn't have the pizzazz and the marketing oomph behind it, to another one that's sort of like, instead of, you know, with drugs, you've got the name brand drugs and the generic drug, but the generic drug is just as good. Go the generic route. You know, it'll save your customer, your client, a lot of money. And always be willing to do that and treat other people and their money the way you would treat your own. That's something that will make them go, you know, this person really does have my best interest at heart. When I got into printing, the way I got in it was largely self-teaching myself. And I mean, I wrote a business plan for my business at night after my day job for probably 2.5 years before I got even close to being able to start this company with a partner who was already in the printing business. And a lot of what I taught myself was through reading trade magazines, especially about digital printing, because I wanted the focus of my company to be a digital printing company. But one of the things that I realized pretty quickly once I started working was I didn't know the terminology. You know, I thought I knew a bit, but I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did. So all you got to do, and I would write this down, is just glossary of printing terms. Just Google that. And what you're going to get is a number of websites that just have literally a glossary of printing terms. And A to Z, it's just like the glossary in the back of a textbook. You know, it is a great thing to have. And believe me, I use that a lot when I was first getting started in printing. There's a lot of acronyms and all kinds of stuff in printing that can be kind of intimidating, even for somebody that's in the business who owns the business, you know, which is kind of crazy. But from the time I started my business, I've wanted to run it with our customer and our consumer in mind. So it didn't really bother me, and I didn't want to lose that touch. So, you know, I have people who work for me who are into the technical aspects of it. That glossary of terms will help you kind of get over that hump as somebody who's not in the printing business, but somebody who does business with it, because you will be more successful in your relationship with printers, and you will be better off working for whoever it is you work for or your clients, whatever, when you can talk some of the talk. Learn how to prepare files to print properly, okay? Because if you don't do anything else as a designer, that's an important thing. Learn how to prepare files so that they print properly. It can cost time because somebody's going to have to fix your files. Some printers will say, they don't work right. They dump them back in your lap and say you need to fix them. What we do is we kind of analyze the file and determine what needs to be done. And, well, if it's something simple, we'll do it and tell them we did it, and we'll give them another proof so that they can double check it. But if it's something more involved, we'll say, this is what needs to be done to fix the file. Either you can do it or we can do it, and if we do it, it'll take about this much time and about this much money. You're talking time and money here, okay? So learn how to prepare files properly. Like, for instance, if you've got this beautiful annual report that's running 3,000 copies of on an 8-color press, then chances are some of what those guys need to have your file set up properly might be a little bit different. But there's some industry standards. Like, for instance, right now it's going to be a PDF that is set up properly if something bleeds, with the bleeds pulled out, the cut marks or the fold marks, or if the paper scores, you know, like creases before it folds, maybe marks, you know, for that process, making sure that it's output properly if it's 4-color process. Little things like that that are kind of general, that's going to go cross-process for sure. Chances are with most printers, technology is such now so that most printers, whether they're huge companies or whether they're small companies now, we have software that if we're doing our job, we need to check your setup. That's why if I'm getting, let's say somebody wants to run 10 business cards, and I can put a column of 5 here and a column of 5 here so I can get all 10 of them. Some designers will think, well, gosh, I'm just going to do your press sheet because I know it'll be done right. At least a third of the time it's not set up right. Okay, and because of that reason, we have to check and make sure that all the cut marks measure out properly, all that kind of stuff. So if that person just gave us a 10-page PDF file, we would look at it real quickly, and then we have imposition software that would impose, it would step those cards on one sheet of paper that way. Consult with your printer, you know, before you go down the road spending a lot of time, spending somebody's money, working smart, knowing from talking with your printing rep or the graphics department at this printing company, wherever you're going to have it printing, is important. You know, to find out just what they want. Get to know a good printer who you can trust, and you can trust them to give you good, truthful advice on maybe how something should be printed or how something should be designed. So you need somebody who's going to level with you, because it's going to catch up with you sooner or later. If they ain't got enough guts or doesn't care about telling you that, at the end of the day, what comes arriving on somebody's door is not going to look as good as it could look, because today's presses are high resolution, and they're going to make the good designs look good, and they're going to show the deficiencies of poor designs. Poor meaning not that they are not nicely designed, but that you're trying to print something that just doesn't work well, so let's say on a digital press. Get to know a printer, and that will be probably the printing rep who would call on you. Develop those relationships and you know, depend on those people. Consider how it's going to print, like I said earlier, you know, before you come up with any designs. For instance, if you're going to do this a folded brochure, just something as simple as a basic trifold brochure. When you're designing it, you've got to consider how much ink you want to going along the folds. You know, if it's going to print on the folds, and that's going to affect too what type of paper that you use. Certain types of paper tend to show cracks a whole lot more than other types of paper. Chances are the paper is going to be white that you're printing on if you're printing a real colorful brochure. And so if you load the folds up with ink, especially dark ink, you're asking for issues. All paper has a grain direction. If you, on this sheet of paper, if you take it and fold it this way, and don't fold it all the way, just sort of do this, you can see how it doesn't really, it tends to crackle a little bit this way. But when you take it and you fold it this way, there's none. That means the grain in this sheet of paper is going this way. Because paper, when it was made, was just this soupy pulp. And it came from trees, and even though the fibers are broken down into microfibers, when it's all said and done, all those fibers are pretty much aligned in one way on any paper that's made. If you're folding this brochure the way you have it configured, printed, like this, on this particular piece of paper this way, it's going to crack a whole lot more, or tend to crack a whole lot more than if you're folding it that way. Another printer term that you can use and learn real quickly is, on this particular sheet, this sheet is called grain long, because the grain is going in the long direction on it. This would be, if it were going this way, grain short on this sheet. Another thing too is when you look at the label that's on the side of a pack of paper, and it could be a ream of 8.5 by 11 paper, it could be a box of 26 by 40 inch paper. If that ream says it's 8.5 by 11, then the grain is going in the 11-inch direction. If it should say 11 by 8.5, that means that particular ream of paper is short grain. Sometimes I have to remind our graphics people, when we're trying to squeeze as many things, as many of whatever it is we're printing on a press sheet, I have to remind them that the trim marks don't necessarily need to be, or the cut marks, you know, like that big. But sometimes, you know, they just can't get that out of their mind, you know, that it must be. All they need to be when you need to conserve space is a little tiny tick mark, or even a dot sometimes. Just don't make it real thick. You want it to be thin so that they have a teeny tiny little target to hit, because it could be that way or that way, and you want everything cut right. So begin with the end in mind. Consider how it's going to print, how it's going to finish and bind and all that before you start designing. These days it's all about speed. And ever since I decided I wanted to go into printing in 1995, I've got to say that's one of the things that I recognized even back then, that people wanted it quicker, and they wanted it for less, and they wanted it still to look good. And that's what digital printing does these days. It allows you to have short runs so that you don't have to fill up a closet or a warehouse full of printing just to get a good price on it. You can keep your information up to date. You can keep the very last information that you get and go to press real quickly, because you don't have all that setup involved and drying time. When it comes out of a digital press, it's ready to go. Printing's alive and well. Learn about it so you'll be more well-rounded.